Started, Masha?
Yes.
Great. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the BMRC annual meeting for 2022. Can't be, can't believe we're here already. The summer is passing really fast. Um, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who are part of our community, whether you are one of our funders, one of the community members in the larger BMRC community. If you're in the Chicagoland area, if you're out of town, we'd just like to extend a welcome. I'd like to take a moment to celebrate um, our staff members. Um, Allison, Lori, T, and Marsha have been doing an amazing job with maintaining momentum during a really challenging time, considering um, the pandemic and all that's going on at our home institution of University of Chicago and across our member institutions. But somehow they managed to juggle everything and keep, um, maintain awareness of all that's going on and maintain momentum. And so I just want to take a moment to thank our staff. I'd like to take a moment to thank our board members. The expertise they hold is extremely valuable to us all. We couldn't do all that we do without, folks like Raquel, Elizabeth, Jamie, Adam, Lee, who can't be with us today, unfortunately. Our board member emeriti, Kathleen and Leroy. Um, Everyone contributes in their own way, and that wasn't a comprehensive naming of everyone. You can look at the BMRC newsletter for a full list or the BMRC website, but I just really like to shout out all of those who are currently serving as board members or those who have served in the past. Really appreciate your time, effort, and energy and all that it takes um, to serve and contribute at the level that you do. Thank you. Want to thank all of the fellows and interns of the summer, past and present. Would like to thank, of course, our host institution, University of Chicago, um, and say welcome to the new dean, Torsten Reimer. So many people to thank, so many people to welcome. I can't possibly be comprehensive, but know that if you have dedicated um, a minute, an hour, a day, or a year to the BMRC, we thank you for your time, effort, and energy. Our collective work around African American history and culture and preserving, archiving, and promoting it is extremely important, and we really do value all those who contribute to that. If you can take the time to go and look at this summer's BMRC newsletter, browse through and take a look at the wonderful projects that we have going on, from the Archie Motley Archival Interns, the summer short-term fellows, the completion of the Mellon Grant. Take a look, and I think even though I'm involved, I'm in awe at all that we get done. With membership, we're proud to be growing. We have some new members to announce soon. And if you're interested in joining the BMRC, we'd be glad to have you. Please initiate a conversation with me or with Marsha or others who you know are involved. At this time, I'd like to pass the mic to Marsha, and we just, again, thank you for your energy and attention today. Thank you for attending, and please enjoy the meeting. Marsha, it's on you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Steve, for that warm welcome and introduction to the 2022 annual meeting. My name is Marcia Walker McWilliams, and I am the Executive Director of the Black Metropolis Research Consortium. And once again, welcome to our annual meeting. I'm going to just get my screen ready to share. Is everyone able to view the screen? If I can get a...
Yeah, we can do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So if this is your first virtual annual meeting with us, or if this is one of many since the pandemic began, thank you again for joining us. I am going to be delivering our annual report, which includes more information about the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, some of our highlights from the past year, and we are also very excited today to be able to feature presentations from our 2022 Archie Motley Archival Interns and one of our summer short-term fellows. And my colleague, Allison Sutton, will introduce that part of our annual meeting. But if you can bear with me for a few minutes, I just want to share more about the wonderful work that we've been able to do over the past year. So for those who are maybe new to the BMRC, we are a metropolitan Chicago-based membership association of libraries, universities, museums, cultural heritage, and other archival institutions. What connects all of these institutions is that they contain historical collections and archives that document Black culture, history, and experiences. Many of these collections are related to Chicago, but they also have a broader focus. The mission of the BMRC is to connect all who seek to document, share, understand, and preserve Black experiences. And we hope that by the end of today, you'll understand a little bit more about how we operate and how we really seek to fulfill this mission. Some of the things that the BMRC does. So we aid researchers in locating Black historical collections, and I'll be excited to talk a little bit more about the newest way that we're helping researchers engage. We also advise potential donors of Black historical collections on helpful resources, how they might find a repository to care for their collections, or how they might care for their own collections. We also aid institutions, including our members, in their efforts to preserve and share Black historical collections. And we support scholarship on Black history in Chicago, as well as activation of collections on Black experiences. And we support students who are interested in careers in archives and cultural heritage collections. And again, we'll be sharing more about how we do this work over the next hour or so. To share a little bit more about our BMRC member institutions, you can see the logos here on this slide. So we have a number of university partners, including our host institution, the University of Chicago. We also have public libraries. We have independent libraries like the Newberry. We have arts-based organizations, cultural heritage organizations, museums, and also a government organization as well. And we are really excited that this past year, we were able to add 2 new members to the BMRC, including the Southside Community Arts Center and the DuSable Black History Museum and Educational Center. Interestingly enough, both of those institutions were founded by the great Margaret Burroughs. So we're very excited to welcome them to the BMRC. And as we speak, we are currently in the process of onboarding additional members who we hope to share with you over the course of the next year, and certainly at our annual meeting in 2023. As Steve mentioned, we have a wonderful array of board members, and I've listed their names here. Stephen Adams, who you just heard from, is our board chair and has been stewarding that work and leading us in some wonderful ways. So thank you very much, Stephen. And we have a number of other board members who have really been so supportive and helpful with the BMRC and how we have sort of moved through the past few years with all of the challenges that have been happening, but also being able to experience some really important growth. So thank you to our current board members. And again, thank you to past board members who may be on the call today. Just taking a moment to recognize our staff, including my colleagues, Allison Sutton, who serves as the BMRC's program manager, really leading our flagship programs, which are the Archie Motley Archival Internship and the Summer Short-Term Fellowship Program. To Lori Moses and T. Calvin, who were both brought on to support our work, funded by a grant from the Mellon Foundation. Lori Lee Moses serves as our portal archivist and has really helped us move that initiative forward in some great ways. And T. Calvin as our community engagement archivist, who has busily prepared a number of really great archival workshops and archival engagement sessions. And we would be remiss if we did not mention and recognize student workers who we had with us this past year, Alex Gazzolo and Warren Wagner, who were very instrumental to helping us get some initiatives off the ground. We also want to thank folks throughout the BMRC network and our member institutions who have supported us on some key projects, including those who evaluate and select our interns. That includes Allison Sutton, Donna Edgar, who's actually a former Archie Motley Archival Intern, and Dr. Kimberly Black from Chicago State. We also want to take time to thank those who, for the past year and a half, had worked on the portal working group, assisting Lori Lee Moses in the development of the BMRC archive portal. Many folks throughout our member institutions were so grateful for their insight and feedback on this tremendous project. We cannot do what we do without funders and supporters. So we wanted to take a minute to thank them as well. These include our host institution, the University of Chicago, and the University of Chicago Library, whose umbrella we are under as the BMRC, who supports our staff offices and many of the functions of the BMRC. So we are thankful for the support of our host institution. There are also foundations and funding organizations that have supported the BMRC for this past year, including the Mellon Foundation, the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, which has been a consistent supporter of the BMRC for many years. The Terra Foundation for American Art has supported the BMRC. And also, I'll be sharing more about this a little bit later, but the National Endowment for Humanities and the American Library Association have supported the BMRC with a very important grant over this past year. And we are also thankful to our member institutions. The BMRC is a membership-based organization. So all of our members pay dues to support the work of the consortium, and we are thankful for their continued membership. We also from time to time receive donations from individuals and private donors, and we are also thankful for their support of the BMRC. Okay. So I'll take a few minutes now just to really reflect on some of our highlights over the past year, sort of a year in a review, focusing on BMRC initiatives, events, and other forms of engagement. As part of our grant from the Mellon Foundation on documenting Black Chicago, a key portion of this work revolves around archival workshops for community members, for BMRC member institutions, and our community engagement archivist T. Calvin has led this work over the past year, providing, I believe, somewhere around 10 workshops and archival awareness series. They included introduction to archiving workshops for those who are stewarding their own collections, workshops on digital archiving and digitization. We had workshops on opportunities for organizations, including some of our funders, Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, as well as others in Chicago, like the Driehaus Foundation and Illinois Humanities, and the opportunities that they have for organizations that are caring for collections. We also, as a part of this series, hosted a genealogy workshop led by Tony Burrows. And more recently, we have had an archives awareness panel focusing on the experiences of Black Chicago archivists and their efforts to archive important collections and do memory work. You can find many of these workshops were recorded, and they're available through the BMRC website under the resources tab, as well as on the BMRC's YouTube channel. So you'll be able to refer back to these resources constantly, and also we hope that you will point others to them as well. Also, as a part of our Mellon Grant Initiative, Documenting Black Chicago, in March 2022, we had the launch of the BMRC Archives portal. As I mentioned, this work was led by Lori Lee Moses in partnership with John Young from the Digital Library Development Center at the University of Chicago, the Portal Working Group, and others who really worked to update and modernize the existing BMRC collections database that we have, which now you'll see the image on the screen is the launch of the BMRC Archives portal. If we had more time today, we'd engage in some really awesome demonstrations of how you can utilize this portal. But thankfully, Lori Moses, in partnership with John Young, put on a webinar about how the process was of building the BMRC Archives portal and how it could be used for researchers. And that webinar is also available on our YouTube channel. Just taking a moment to really sort of pause and think about the significance of this portal is that we have seen it used in some really amazing ways. We have researchers from across the country who will contact us. And the BMRC really thinks about researchers in a broad way. A researcher is anyone who has a question. And so in the development of this portal, we really wanted it to be accessible to a broad array of researchers, from community members who are seeking to learn more about their neighborhood or their church or their civic organization, or maybe a family member who donated a collection to a member institution. It could be a History Day student who is looking for a project. It could be a seasoned academic scholar who is looking to find out where the collections exist that are relevant to their scholarship. We really designed this portal to be accessible to a broad array of folks. And we also designed it to clear up one of the larger misconceptions about the BMRC, is that we are ourselves an archival repository. We are not. And so one of the things that we have done with this portal is, if you were to pop in a search and you will get back a number of collections, you can click on a collection and you'll see the logo for the institution where that collection is housed. And you can click on a link that will take you directly to that institution to learn more about their visitor policies, their researcher policies, and to see what other collections they have available. So the Archives portal really does serve as a tool for funneling researchers back to our member institutions to learn more about their collections as well. And again, we've seen this used in some really wonderful ways and are excited to do more with getting awareness out about the portal and the possibilities that exist there. We also engage in a number of events and plan events with partners. One of the events that we had last fall was a discussion with Chicago's new directors. This was co-sponsored with our friends at the Chicago Collections Consortium. Annually, we partner with the Chicago Collection Consortium on a joint event that will be sort of useful and engaging for our membership. And this past year, we wanted to focus on new library directors. Bria Ballard-Thrower at UIC, Chris Brown, the commissioner of the Chicago Public Library, and Esteban Montano, who moved from Roosevelt to Dominican University as their library director. The panel was moderated by Ellen Keith of the Chicago History Museum, and it was a great opportunity to really have a way to learn more about what these new library leaders were thinking, especially as they were stepping into their positions in the thick of the pandemic. And so we look forward to co-sponsoring more events with Chicago Collections Consortium. We also sponsor events with authors who have books that are related to Black Chicago and really exploring the themes and the experiences of Black people within the city. This year, we partnered with Daian Contreras, whose book Energy Never Dies was published by the University of Illinois Press. And we co-sponsored on 2 book events, one with the Chicago Public Library's Carter G. Woodson Reading Circle in January 2022, and another just over a week ago in July, co-sponsored with Arts and Public Life and the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture at the University of Chicago. Of course, we have a number of fellows within our BMRC network who we partner with and share information about their work, but we are also really interested in partnering with other authors who may not have been former BMRC fellows, but who are publishing work or creating scholarship, creating art, and other forms of documentation that really do add to the history of Black experience in Chicago. Okay. We also had, in March 2022, what has now become an annual event, thanks to BMRC Program Manager Allison Sutton, which is our Women's Herstory event that typically features BMRC fellows. This past year, we featured Dr. Misty DeBerry, who was a 2016 BMRC fellow, and that event was moderated by Dr. Grace Gibson, who was a 2020-2021 BMRC fellow. Led to some really amazing, interesting conversation about the role of arts and expression, thinking about Black feminism and queer identity, both within and beyond academic spaces. And so we look forward again to continuing this program annually every March. Some exciting things happened. Really, I think everything's exciting, but I'm probably biased in my role. But the BMRC was one of 200 organizations across the country that were awarded an American Library Association, American Rescue Plan, Humanities in Action grant. These grants were given to organizations to really help support public programming that would amplify underrepresented voices and populations. What we decided to do with this grant, and we could not have done this without our partner, Crystal Johnson and the Chicago History Day, to really develop a workshop for Chicago public school teachers on using primary sources in their classrooms and in their advising of History Day students. And we really wanted to focus on primary sources that shed light on Black experiences and that amplify BMRC member institution collections. So we jointly developed a workshop called Tools for Exploration and Sharing African American Archival Gems that we have been offering this summer to Chicago public school teachers. In fact, the last workshop was held yesterday at the Chicago History Museum. And we are thankful for Ellen Keith and Julie Robuski, who really helped provide some wonderful sessions on archiving and research at the Chicago History Museum. And we're also thankful to Adam Green, a professor of history at the University of Chicago, and Lionel Kimball, a professor of history and African American studies at Chicago State, for sharing more about how they actually analyze and utilize African American primary source material in the classroom. This was a pilot program for us that we had funding to explore through this ALA and NEH grant, and we are hopeful that we will be able to continue this outreach to Chicago public school teachers and their students. Also just want to take a minute to really acknowledge some current things that are happening with the BMRC. You may recall that we launched a physical exhibit and a digital exhibit in 2021 to honor the 15th anniversary of the BMRC. However, due to COVID, we could not actually allow people into the exhibition space in order to see that. So we really promoted the digital exhibit at that time. Well, we're very grateful that there was space in the University of Chicago Special Collections Research Gallery, Special Collections Research Center Gallery, in order to have an encore for the exhibit. And so you can now visit in person our exhibition about the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, which includes some new features that will be available from July 25th through September 2nd, 2022. You can find out more information about this in our most recent newsletter, or also by going to the University of Chicago Library website. There are some visitor guidelines related to COVID-19 that you will want to be aware of prior to visiting. But you can also reach out to us directly at bmrc@uchicago.edu to connect with us about the possibility of tours for this exhibition. We also want to let you know about something really exciting that we have done, which is to expand our membership structure. The past membership structure for the BMRC included membership categories at the level of full and associate members. Full and associate members have archives that are freely accessible to the public and which document within those collections some evidence of Black experiences, history, and culture. However, we recognize that there are many organizations who are related to the mission and the work and aligned with the work of the BMRC, but who may not have freely accessible archives that are really available at this point. And so we wanted to think about expanded membership categories that would still allow us to engage those organizations and for those organizations to engage and support the BMRC. So we have two new categories: an affiliate membership for organizations. And this may be organizations that, again, have relevant archives, but those archives aren't yet accessible, or those archives require a fee. We also have affiliate membership level for individuals. And these are for individuals who are interested in the workshops that the BMRC offers, the networking opportunities, invitation to membership-based events that we'll be having. And so we really wanted to think in an expansive, but also with a fee structure that's accessible for organizations. And so if you're interested in learning more about BMRC membership, again, you can reach out directly to myself, to others who you know are involved in the BMRC, and you can find more information available on our website. So with that said, I want to sort of bring an end to the annual report portion of the BMRC annual meeting and begin to turn it over to our BMRC program manager, Allison Sutton. We have 3 of our Archie Motley Archival Interns who are going to be presenting, and we also have one of our fellows. So Allison, I'm gonna let you just take it away.
Thank you, Marcia. As the BMRC's program manager, I am delighted to lead 2 of our primary educational initiatives. So first, the mission of the Archie Motley Archival Internship program is to create educational and meaningful internship opportunities for undergraduate, graduate students, and some recent grads as well. Students of color are selected for practical employment experience, and they work with cultural heritage professionals, archivists at one of our BMRC's member institutions across the summer for about 8 weeks. So since its inception in 2016, 18 interns have completed the Archie Motley internship. And I'm including in that number the 3 you will hear from in just a moment. Each will give a brief presentation about their internship experience this summer at one of the BMRC member institutions. And after each speaks, we will have time for 1 or 2 questions before moving on to the next intern. So first, we will hear from Cameron Drake, who is the rising junior at the University of Chicago, where he majors in history and critical race and ethnic studies with a minor in theater performance. Cameron is working on the Documenting Black History in DeKalb County and at Northern Illinois University project. It's a joint effort of the BMRC member institution, Northern Illinois University, and the DeKalb County History Center. Cameron, if you're ready.
Hi everyone, give me 1 second and I will share my screen. So sorry. Nope, not what I'm trying to do. Oh, I just this. Wait, let me share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Awesome. Wait, hi everyone, my name is Cameron Drake. I am, as Ms. Sutton said, a rising junior at the University of Chicago. And I was working with Northern Illinois University in the DeKalb County History Center in their Oral Histories project. So just for what I will be going over today, I will be going over editing the oral histories and the thematic elements involved with that. I'll be going over the stories that I had the privilege of hearing and listening to, some final thoughts, and then finally time for questions. So when it comes to editing oral histories, one of the things that I had to do was editing the transcripts. So they used this software called Otter AI, which would have a automatic transcription of any audio that you put into the software. And then I would go in and just edit it for both clarity and just any minor proofreading edits. And so one of the things that I asked my supervisors to do was if they could put them on YouTube as private videos, just because I'm hard of hearing and it would make it easier for me to read their lips rather than rather than listen to the audio. So having both that audio and visual aspect was very important for me. I also used Premiere Pro to edit some of the videos because the Northern Illinois University and the DeKalb County History Center, this project was a website that they were creating in order to showcase these stories to the public. And we'll get more into that with the thematic elements, but I used Premiere Pro to edit some of the videos together. And this was really important to me because this was a group of Black community members, mainly associated with one of the Black churches in DeKalb. And so getting to tell their story was very important to me. And it was interesting when it came to like editing the transcript versus editing the videos, because they're both ways to tell the stories of Black elders in the Black community, but it made it interesting for me in that it's such a different framework, if that makes sense. There were 4 things that I had to look out for as I was finding these stories, among others, but the 4 main ones were hope, community, exclusion, and then fear. And at first, I was finding a lot of exclusion and fear stories, but then as I continued, I was able to find I was supposed to find timestamps for hope and stories of community, and it was really interesting hearing stories about these people who had lived these long lives in a sundown town, and their experiences still finding that hope in that community among that exclusion and fear. So without going into too much detail, I heard a lot of stories of resilience. I heard stories of family. I heard stories of community and communion. And I heard stories of connections among community and getting to understand the lives that these people lived. And so it was really interesting because one of the stories that they heard was from this pastor named Reverend Mitchell. And Reverend Mitchell started one of the Black churches in DeKalb County. And his church had been mentioned by basically every story that I had heard prior to his, in every transcription that I had to edit prior to his. But getting to hear his story and have that epiphany moment was a very awe-inspiring moment, because it's like, oh, you're the one that we've all been talking about. And it really shows the significance to me of the impact that Black elders have on the community around them and on the significance of the histories of the stories that we don't always get to hear. So just a few final thoughts. In terms of things that I would do differently personally as an intern, I think I would go through and listen, just because I was rushing just a bit when I first began. So I didn't get to give as much of a, I didn't get to give as much of the listening ears I would have liked because I was so focused on editing. But I think it's important that we record these oral histories, because these are stories that these are stories that don't often get told. And these are stories because they aren't they don't make the newsreel. They aren't a part of the latest academic journal, but I still think these stories are important. And I think these are stories that we should be, stories that we should be recording for future generations. Thank you to the BMRC, to Allison Sutton, my project manager, to Michelle Donahoe at the DeKalb County History Center, and to Drew Grandegree at Northern Illinois University for this incredible opportunity. Questions?
Cameron, Had you previously worked with oral histories in any of your previous experiences? And if not, I think, you mentioned software that you were using that might not be familiar. Maybe you could tell us a little something about that.
Yeah, so I am using oral histories for my history thesis, and I was briefly involved in an interview for another BMRC project, the Chicago Black Dance Legacy Project, but I wasn't involved. I hadn't been involved with this aspect of the oral history process until this opportunity, and then I also. The software that I use was Premiere Pro. It's this Adobe video editing software. Was a software that I used to edit the videos. I think it was very helpful for me. And then the software I used for the oral histories was the software history that the DeKalb County History Center was using was Otter AI.
Thank you. I think we have a hand raised. Wonder Drake, did you have a question?
Oh,
Feel free to unmute yourself.
I think, can you hear me now?
Yes.
The chat is disabled, so that's why I couldn't put in the chat.
Okay.
I wondered if it would be possible with the things you learned to create short TikToks that might appeal to this next generation coming up. Like when I was coming up, we would have converted this to children's books for the children to read, but would it be possible, Cameron, with what you did to do short TikToks on the lives that you listen to for educational purposes and things?
Yeah, for sure. I think using social media is a great and often not an underutilized resource. And I think it would definitely be possible to create TikToks from the stories that we create. A lot of the stories were, I think the shortest story we had was around like a minute, which is just about like the optimum time for TikTok. But with some like simple editing in terms of like, because one of the things that I did was I added a transition and a title slide. And I wasn't able to find the website, unfortunately, in my email. I would put it in the chat. But if I can find the website, I will hope that it will be emailed out in the next BMRC newsletter, so that you all will be able to see. But the to answer your question, yes, I do think so. I think it would be a great resource that should be utilized more.
Okay, Cameron, we have another question. Was there something you learned that surprised you during this project?
I think something that, I think in terms of the stories I heard, I think I was definitely surprised because at least I'm as a history and crest major and like as someone who fancies themselves a storyteller, I don't always get to see stories of, I feel like at least some of the nuances of the like Black community can be lost sometimes. And one of the stories I was able to hear was about how single mothers in DeKalb County would come together and boil hot water anytime there was news of the KKK coming through. And so getting to hear that story of like these people coming together, it surprised me that I hadn't heard anything like it before. And surprised that a story like that isn't more prevalent, if that makes sense.
Okay. I see that we have a couple of additional questions, but because of time, we will need to move on to the next intern. All right. And so let's do that. And so you'll hear now from Daian Rodriguez. Daian is a rising sophomore at the University of Chicago and majors in anthropology and Latin American and Caribbean studies. So Daian is working on the Cook County Historic Archives and Records Office Oral History Collection at the Cook County Historic Archives. So Daian, if you're ready.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning, everyone. I am sharing my screen right now. Here we go. Okay, everyone can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So Yes, my name is Daian Rodriguez. My pronouns are she, her. And like Allison said, I'm a rising second year at the University of Chicago. This summer, I had the opportunity, or I've been had the opportunity because I'm still working at the Cook County Historical Archives and Records Office, best known as CARO, under the wing of the manager of archives, Kyle Hearn. From her, I've learned a lot of what it takes to create and manage an archive. CARO is fairly recent, and I'm so grateful to be part of the initial steps CARO has been taken. To give a little bit of background, the mission statement for CARO is to provide greater knowledge and understanding for county residents and employees of the importance of Cook County's role in the growth and development of the region, state, and nation through the documentation and preservation of county documents and artifacts held by county agencies and offices. So through CARO, I've been able to learn what it takes to create a archive where we have an accurate representation of a community of in this case, Cook County's community, in which as we know, it's not uncommon where history is only told from one point of view, and it has and some communities are underrepresented or misrepresented. So through CARO, we want to change that and have an archive where we can see the history from different points of view. And one way of doing this is through the Oral History Collection Project, which I'm working with. The Oral History Collection Project will document stories from county's residents, city officials, legislators, and in a way of having history through different points of views and through different voices, and where history will not only be told from one voice, but rather from everyone that has played a role in the growth and development of Cook County. The mission statement is the Cook County Historic Archives and Records Office is responsible for compiling the history of county government and explaining the role the county played in the growth and development of the region, state, and nation. And so through the Oral History Collection Project, we're able to document county history through the voices of county residents, cities, officials, and legislators. It's been really interesting of learning how everything that goes through creating an oral history collection, more of creating the methods we want to use of recording these interviews for oral history. In my training, I've learned how to use equipment needed for these interviews, like recorders, microphones, the platforms used to record these interviews. The development of best practice of oral history guide is the one I've been working with the most, whether it is by watching videos and giving feedback of how useful they were for me to understand the process of how to conduct oral history interviews in order to include them in the guide that we will use as a document, as a script to follow to do these interviews, by preparing questions we want to include in these interviews that we think are important and crucial to have documented, by putting tips and including tips for the preparation of initial outreach and approach for possible interviewees that we want to have in the document, and participating in mock interviews. Mock interviews, it's been a really interesting and nice experience, because I've been able to not only have my experience of an interviewer, but rather as being interviewed. And it's very crucial in the sense of we know what it's like being both positions, and both being the interviewer and the interviewee, and how we want to construct an environment of hospitality and empathy when doing these interviews. When we select someone to be interviewed, this person is telling us their story, and a story that has impacted the growth and development of a county. So we want to make sure this person has feel safe when doing these interviews. And by having these mock interviews, we know how we want to lead. Also, these will be recorded and uploaded to the document of the best practices of oral history guide, in a way of having it as also like a script of how we want to follow these interviews. It's been really interesting working at the Cook County Historical Archives office. And I am really grateful for the opportunity both the Cook County and the BMRC has given me. Thank you. And I will answer any questions.
Thank you, Daian. That was great. Questions for Daian? Let's see if there's something in the Q&A. Not at the moment. Okay. Well, Daian, what can you say briefly anyway about the plan going forward for the work that you've done? What is the immediate plan? I know that this Cook County Historical Archives is really very new, so there's a lot of work to be done. Maybe you can say something about the plan for the specific work, the best practices manual that you developed, etc.
Yeah, so right now we really want to start with this interview, especially focusing more on like legislators and city officials, recording their stories and their and contribution to helping developing in the growth of Cook County, and their projects and their history of their upbringing into their roles and the work they've done as important members of the community.
Wonderful. So I do see a question. Have there been any challenges or limitations with the technology used to document oral histories for this particular project? And that's from Jordan Brunson.
Not really. It's more of making sure we have access to the right equipment, and more of doing research. What is the right equipment to use? What is the most efficient equipment to use? Not any challenges so far that I at least know of. I was trained by Shakira Dunson, who is a consultant for the for CARO. And she was really helpful by telling me all the tips of what to do. More of, so for example, like if I am doing an interview in person, that I need to have my recorder with me, always have extra batteries, always have a charger, always have backup recorders, in order to always have this, not have any challenges or difficulties when doing an interview. We want to make the interview as smooth as possible.
Okay. All right. So there is one more question in the Q&A, and if you have a moment, you can type an answer for that one, but keeping ourselves on time. So if you can do that, Daian, then we're going to move forward so we can now hear from Sydnie. And thank you very much, Daian. Sydnie Martin is a 2022 graduate of DePaul University. She received her BA in African and Black Diaspora Studies with a minor in history. Sydnie is working this summer on the oral histories of the Black Student Union Project with the Special Collections and University Archives team at DePaul University. Sydnie, when you are ready.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Like Allison said, my name is Sydnie, and this summer I've been working with DePaul University Special Collections on an oral history project of the Black Student Union. So a little bit more about the project to begin. So DePaul's Black Student Union was created in 1968 by a group of Black students who felt that they could not fully participate in the university. They released a list of demands they wanted from the university, including a Black counselor, Black faculty, and a class that focused on the contributions of the Black man. A committee on human relations was created to assess the needs of minority students on campus. A counselor was hired, and departments in the university were encouraged to recruit and hire Black faculty. A year later, the Black Student Union released a second set of demands read out loud in the Schmidt Academic Center, which is an academic building on campus. They gave the university 24 hours to respond. These demands were for a halt of DePaul's expansion program, which they saw to be a racist conspiracy to push Blacks and Puerto Ricans out of the area, a Project 300 program bringing 300 Black and Puerto Rican students to DePaul's campus, regardless of transcripts and exam scores. And ultimately, they took over the Schmidt Academic Center for about 12 hours, disrupting classes and starting important conversations challenging DePaul on their attention to Black students' needs. So the goal of my internship was to conduct at least one oral history interview with a former member of the Black Student Union. In order to do this, I started by researching in the collections. I was fortunate to be in person this summer, so I was able to go into the stacks and pull from different collections. Some records had specific folders about matters of the BSU. Some I had to just read through and see if they ever mentioned the BSU or Black students or any of the issues that were happening on campus at the time. I looked through a lot of committee meeting minutes to see what they were discussing, how changes were being made. I looked through the BSU's documents, I looked through their demands and any other records that they had produced during their time. And I also looked through yearbooks and student newspapers, not only to see what was being reported about the BSU and Black students, but also to see what was happening on campus at the time, since this was a big time for student activism and political involvement. I also did some outside research on the period, just to add context to what was going on nationally, as well as what was going on the campus. My supervisor, Britton, provided me with a lot of material on how to prepare myself for this interview. This is my first time doing oral history, and I didn't know that I was going to be doing oral history coming in, so it was definitely a little bit of a learning curve. But I was able to format some questions, draft some questions, and then we reached out to some people who were members of the BSU. And last Friday, I was able to conduct my first interview with a former member who went to DePaul from 69 to 72. So that's what I've been doing this entire summer. So for the last 2 weeks of this internship, I'm working on the transcription of the interview, cleaning it up, making sure everything is formatted the way it needs to be. And then I will also be working with the oral history metadata synchronizer to get that uploaded as well. So some reflections on my time this summer. So I came in, I just recently graduated from college. So I came in with a career in mind. I knew I wanted to do something working with archives, but I didn't know exactly where I fit with that. I didn't really know what my interest was, or even like what was out there. So I was trying to get more information and experience doing this before I went back to school. So I had to do informational interviews for the for the internship. I also, Allison had set up some guest lectures with different people in different fields, kind of talking about their work, which was super interesting to me to see the different opportunities that are out there. I also got an inside look on the special collection department here at DePaul. I was able to kind of see what people were doing day to day. I was working in the same room with student workers who had their own projects, and I also was working around other archivists to see what they were doing. So it was kind of interesting to see what kind of work was happening in a university archive like this. So that was really cool. And then I also saw the importance of oral histories. Like I said, this is my first time doing an oral history interview or working with oral histories at all. I had studied history a little bit while in school, but we never really touched on oral histories unless it was like a very short debate on whether you can consider it like evidence or reliable, stuff like that. So never really understanding how important it is. And doing the actual interview, I realized that getting these individual perspectives from the people who experience them is so important to add context and extra dimension to what we have back in the archives in our records. So yeah, that was my experience working this summer. I'm really grateful for the DePaul team and also for the BMRC for this opportunity. And I've learned quite a bit. And I kind of am starting to figure out what I'm doing next. So I really appreciate that. But yeah, that's
Wonderful. Thank you, Sydnie. Do we have any questions? If we have even just one question for Sydnie before moving along. Let's see, I'm checking the Q&A. No questions coming up. Oh, let's see. Yep, so let's see. Oral histories are so valuable and reliability is a real issue. How do you screen for reliability?
That's a good question. So this project started from an event that was held on campus earlier this year. And I think it was our Black Student Union now, I'm not exactly sure, who brought in former students and they talked about their experiences. I think they brought in the former president and then another person who was really involved. And they had some people to recommend us to interview as well. So I think we kind of just went off that, knowing that these are people that they trust, so we can screen them as well. And yeah, I think that was about it. It really was just the early talking to her before we actually did the interview. We were kind of able to recognize that she would be a really good resource for us in this project.
Okay, so I think Steve has his hand up. Steve Adams, did you have a question?
Yes. I'm curious about your own perspective on what was happening at DePaul 50 years ago. As you experienced DePaul, you were a DePaul student, right?
Yes.
I'm just curious about your thoughts on present DePaul versus DePaul of the past.
Yeah, I came in before I started really looking into the archives, not really knowing how the university was going to be responding to all of this. And DePaul really kind of upholds itself. It has this Catholic mission, its Vincentian mission that it helps others and that it's very one to serve the community. And I wanted to see what they were doing back 50 years ago. So it seemed like they really were. And the responses that they had in minutes and in memos that the dean was sending to the president and that faculty were talking to each other, it really seemed that they were trying to work with the BSU to get these demands heard and to work on the needs of Black students, which I thought was super interesting. Because I didn't know if there was going to be backlash or not. And from what I was reading, there really seemed to be a lot of cooperation with the BSU. It was also interesting because there seemed to be a lot of parallel between the BSU that I know today and the BSU that was happening back then. I think like when the protest happened in 2020, our BSU sent out like a list of demands to the university, and seeing them do that for the first time in 68 was really cool to see like kind of the parallels of still how the BSU is advocating for Black students on campus.
Okay, just very quickly from Jamie Nelson, you have a question, were there any surprises in terms of the content of the conversation? something that perhaps had not been mentioned before or referenced in the existing documentation that came out in the conversation?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, from what I was reading from administrative reports and minutes and stuff like that, it really did seem like the university was cooperating and working to be better for Black students. And then when I interviewed the person who was a former member, it did seem like that. It seemed like the university was cooperating, but it was more so, they didn't have the focus that they necessarily needed. And despite all these efforts that were kind of face value, there wasn't like too much real change, at least in her perspective, that was really happening on campus. So that was really interesting to me because I came in kind of thinking one way, changed my mind because of what the records were saying. And then when she actually was talking about it, it was kind of just like interesting to piece it all together and get a student perspective versus what the administration thought they were doing.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you, Sydnie. And a huge thank you again to all three of our Archie Motley interns, Daian Rodriguez, Cameron Drake, and Sydnie Martin. Thank you so much. So I know that some of you are familiar with our summer short-term fellowship, with the summer short-term fellowship program. But briefly, for those of you who are not, annually, the BMRC offers a 1-month residential fellowship right here in the city of Chicago for the summer short-term fellows. The fellowship program has engaged scholars, artists, writers, and public historians. And the idea in having them here is so that they can conduct research at one of, well, not just one, but at a few of our BMRC member institutions and formulate new historical narratives on the Black experience. So then the original research and art developed through this program is significant, and as it does illuminate national and international importance of Chicago to African-American history. So a huge thank you, really briefly, to our 2022 Fellowship Jury Committee, Richard Courage of SUNY Westchester County Community College, Jonathan Fenderson, professor over at Washington University in St. Louis, Lionel Kimball, professor over at History, Chicago State University, Annie Mooney, who's professor of art history and visual culture at Columbia College, Chicago, Lisa Olson, who is director of Chicago Studies at the Newberry and also sits on the BMRC board, Doug Williams, national recruiter and of AmeriCorps' Vista and Citizen Schools. So thank you to all of them. This summer, we do have 7 fellows, all of whom are listed on our website if you want to find out more about them and their research. Also, please continue to stay tuned into the BMRC social media and checking our website for presentation dates. I know that many of you are already looking forward to that. So today, we are fortunate to hear from one of the fellows about her research. Michelle Johnson is a joint PhD candidate in African American Studies and History at Yale University. She grew up in Waukegan, Illinois, which is a far north suburb of Chicago. Her research takes her back to Chicago in part to reconnect with her family history. Her father grew up in Lake Meadows, and her grandparents were Southside residents for most of their lives. Michelle is committed to producing research that reaches beyond traditional and academic settings and hopes that her research on the civil rights movement in Chicago might one day inspire young Chicagoans to create change within their communities. She was originally inspired to study history in high school and asked the simple question at that time, what happened during the civil rights movement in Waukegan? She hopes her research inspires young scholars to ask similar questions. Michelle, if you are ready to share your screen.
I am. Give me just a minute to figure out my technology.
Okay, not a problem. Take a minute, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Afterwards, we will have time for a few questions from Michelle. there.
There we go. That'll work, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, I wanted to start off by saying hello to everyone. It's great to see you all. This is a really awesome community that I'm so glad I get a chance to be a part of this summer and hopefully, continue being a part of moving forward. It was really exciting to hear from the summer interns. I'm really excited to hear all of you doing oral history research, which I think is so important. And unfortunately not something I got to this summer, but plan to do in the future. I'm also just excited to have this opportunity to have this fellowship this summer. Like Allison said in my introduction, I've been working on this project in some form or fashion since I was in high school. It actually started as a Chicago History Day or National History Day project when I was a sophomore. So we're looking at more than 10 years on this project now. And being a fellow this summer actually led me into archives that I didn't even know existed. So even after 10 years of this project, finding new archives and things that I didn't know, collections I needed to be looking at but had no idea even existed, was really exciting. So I'm just really grateful to have this opportunity and be in such a good cohort. I also wanted to give a big shout out to the rest of my summer fellows here on this call. I know I see you all and I'm really excited to hear about your research in talks moving forward too, because I know that we're all sort of together as a community doing really amazing work. Just to get a little bit more into my background, I know Allison did some of this introduction for me, but I did grow up in Waukegan, so not a true Chicagoan by any means, but sort of a Chicagoarian as my background. And really, I started this research because I was interested in my own family history. Unfortunately, my grandparents on my dad's side passed away when I was very young, kindergarten or so definitely before I could have done any sort of oral history research, unfortunately, or oral history interviews with them. And my research is really meant to, in part, sort of fill those gaps, right? I want to know what's happening in the 50s and 60s as they were living on the south side of Chicago. What was that like for them? What were the political issues that were happening around them? That sort of was what sparked this. And then, even though I don't think that they were particularly active in the civil rights movement, it is really interesting for me to hear about what other people were doing, what other people's grandparents were doing, right? So as I collect this sort of research, I'm always sort of thinking in the back of my mind that hopefully one day maybe someone's great-grandchild reads this book and can pinpoint their grandmother as doing really awesome work in the 1950s or 1960s. So that's really what this is all rooted in, is sort of this idea of family history, this idea of what is still unknown out there and how I can help sort of make that bridge as I move forward as a scholar and hopefully as a public historian in some way, shape, or form as well. So now that I've sort of introduced myself, let me also introduce my project. So my project is called Wagons and Warehouses. You can see it on the screen. Civil rights organizing in Chicago, 1942 to 1966. That time period is 24 years, but really expands a little bit longer than that. And that project title is to my dissertation title for now. So this project is my dissertation project. We'll see how it continues to grow. I'm sort of early. I have not started writing yet or anything like that. So I'm definitely early in the process, and really excited to hear all of your feedback as I am early in this process. But that is sort of the working title of my project for now. It covers a lot of ground, right? 24 years is a lot of time to cover for a dissertation. It doesn't sound like so long, but then once you get into the archives, you learn that actually that's quite a long time. It's meant to be sort of bracketed by, at the beginning, sort of influx of Black folks to Chicago in the Great Migration era. Really, again, pushing back kind of into the 1930s, but really starting in the 1940s and then ending in 1966, because that is when Martin Luther King enters the scene in Chicago for a year on his End Slums campaign. It ends there, not because that's a really clean point. I'm not necessarily satisfied with 1966 as the end point, but mostly because as a dissertation, I got to end somewhere. And I can't write 12 books as my dissertation, right? So I think that we can look at 1966 as a possible endpoint. We could look at 2022 as a possible endpoint, right? This fight for equal education and better education for Black communities is very much still present today. And so 1966 is a little bit of an unsatisfactory endpoint, and we'll actually see where that ends up going as I continue to write. But as I sort of get into the landmarks of what I'm talking about, what are the key moments of this history, you'll see on the screen that there's an image of a protest that says, "Put Willis out without a doubt." a young woman holding up a poster. Willis was Benjamin Willis, who's the superintendent of Chicago Public Schools in the 1950s and 1960s. Really controversial guy on the one hand, very well regarded for building a ton of new schools across the city. As we saw an influx of folks coming into the city during this era, he was building schools left and right. Also controversial for being kind of racist. Also controversial for really sort of putting up poor school facilities in Black neighborhoods. So that's where wagons and warehouses comes from. The Black community during this time period deems these poor facilities Willis wagons and Willis warehouses. I'll get a little bit more into that as we go through this presentation. But as a historian, I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about the historiography. So here are 3 books that really sparked my interest in this project. As I was getting into it, I wrote my undergraduate thesis on sort of civil rights movements in Chicago, not necessarily specific to this particular school issue, but rather more broadly what was happening, more focused on Martin Luther King in Chicago, what was the End Slums campaign about, all of that. And 2 things came up out of that research in my undergraduate work. One was that there was not a single woman mentioned in my research, and part of that is due to the limitations of undergraduate research. And some of that is due to the fact that they were not in the archives easily accessible for me. So that's something that I'm still working on. And then the other thing that came up is there just wasn't a ton of local leadership that came out of this thing. I think there's a couple key characters, and again, I'll mention them later as we get into it. But mainly I was focused on Martin Luther King. We were talking about these big leaders, and I wanted to get more into the local leadership. Now, as I move forward in my research, as I've gotten more interested in the school desegregation movement in and of itself, I have some more books to lean on, luckily, and some good research. You'll see, I know some of these people are affiliated with the BMRC in various ways. We have a documentary up here, 63 Boycott, which is really the heart of my research, is around that movement, right? So the 63 Boycott was a huge school boycott in October 1963, and the movement that surrounded that. It's an amazing documentary. I would absolutely recommend it to anyone. While my work is a lot of kind of boring images of paper, right? Like I'm about to show you a bunch of old paper that is not the most exciting thing to look at. This documentary is full of amazing, amazing imagery, amazing video, interviews with people, all of that. So would absolutely recommend any of these books, but a lot of these books are focused after the 1960s. And so I'm really interested in what came before that era. So this summer, I spent a lot of time in the archives. I'm actually still very much working in the archives. I'm still in Chicago and I'm still doing this research. I'm not done yet. And I've been here since June, so I'm still going. But I was bouncing around archives all over the place. So I've been in UIC, I've been at the Harold Washington Library. I visited the Woodson Library actually a few months ago before summer, but I have some work in their collections too. The Chicago History Museum really came through for me this summer with some archives that I A, didn't know existed, and B, were really golden for me, including the Cyrus Hall Adams papers. Cyrus Adams sounding like he's a guy from the 1800s or something, but turns out he was a school board member in the 1960s. And then University of Chicago, where I really dove into some collections that I already knew existed. So some of these papers, absolutely, I had visited in the past in some ways or fashion. And this summer, I really had the opportunity to dive into these collections full in. And that has been amazing. So I'm going to show off a few documents that I collected. I will say that I have taken pictures of over 1,200 documents this summer. And I certainly have not read anywhere near 1,200. So my sort of tactics going into the summer was I'm going to take as many pictures as I possibly can, and then I'm going to bring them all back with me to New Haven and really dive in, read them, get at it. Obviously, I read a little bit as I go through to find out what I even need to be taking pictures of, but a lot of the work still is to be done. So a lot of that reading is still to be done. But I did highlight a few documents that either changed the way I was thinking about my project as I went through, or that I think are just really interesting documents, hopefully to show off. Again, I know that looking at pieces of paper on a screen are not always the most exciting thing, but hopefully it's at least sort of fun for us as we go through. So the first document, and I will try to make this actually a little bit bigger. So hopefully that's a little bit bigger, a little bit easier for everyone to read. And so we have the Chicago Schools, official organ of the Citizen Schools Committee. The Citizen Schools Committee being, as it sounds like, a citizens committee working on school. It was a mixed group, originally sort of meant to curb sort of misuse of funding in the schools actually early on in the 20th century and sort of shifted into more of the school desegregation movement as we go through. But this document is really important to me because I actually came across it just a few weeks ago, and it's from October 1939. So this headline about double shift schools, which means that students are going only for half the day, was something that was a major issue in the 1960s, right? The 1963 boycott is actually partially about this double shift issue. But to see that headline coming from a newsletter in 1939 blew my mind. I had no idea that that was on people's radars, really, at least at this level in that decade. So that was really exciting. That's why I'm showing it to you first. Not necessarily, again, because it's the most interesting document in the world, but because it really starts to push that timeline a little bit earlier than I even knew about. The issues are a little bit different. I think that the way that they're posing things is like, oh, the South Side of Chicago is so bad. These students need to be in school all day. And I don't necessarily agree with that or think that that's the way that people pose it as we go forward through the 20th century, but it is something that was happening in the 30s, and I just didn't know that prior to finding this document. Moving us forward, I did know that in the 1940s, one of the big issues was how schools were teaching Black history, right? Something that's still very much an issue. And so here we have a document sort of talking about the school books that are being used, talking about who's writing those textbooks, what are they talking about, how are they posing like the work of the Klan, for example. And so this is one of the key issues that people are latching onto, and the NAACP in particularly is latching onto in the 1940s. So this is, again, that earlier work, definitely before Brown versus Board of Education, where we see sort of the ball starting rolling on trying to get better education for Black students. And this is, I mean, now we know that Black history for sure is going to help white students as well. Like, this history is just important for all of us to know, but it definitely is also something that is being pushed by Black civil rights organizations. Moving forward again, we have a statement of the NAACP before the Chicago Board of Education in 1962. I would say that a lot of the documents that I came across were testimonies at Board of Education meetings. These are like the really golden nuggets that I have of PTAs and individual parents and civil rights organizations coming forward and giving their testimony about the state of the schools. So this is just one example of that. I have possibly hundreds of these in my now collection that I have, and a lot to read through, but I found them to be really intriguing, really sometimes entertaining, and really sort of thoughtful ways that people were presenting the issues of the schools to the Board of Education, really starting in the late 50s, early 60s. Then we get into 1963, and here we have that march, right? This is what that documentary is about. This is the boycott. In October of 1963. So this is a poster. Again, hopefully this is a more interesting image to look at, but I think that it shows that like this was a major march. This is not necessarily the image that people expect to see of Chicago with the L running above it, right? This is something that maybe you expect to see in Selma, Alabama, or something like that. So I think that that is one thing that really comes out of this research, is that these issues were not just Southern issues. Again, a flyer asking parents to get their students involved in this boycott, and actually highlighting the fact that while they were having this boycott, they were also having freedom days and freedom schools for the students. And as part of that, we have a guide to freedom school leaders. So this was actually a very fun find, sort of the syllabus, if you will, for freedom schools, including some freedom songs. You got a freedom diploma at the end if you were a student who attended this event. And it was just like a very fun find for me, something that I think is, again, sort of something that gets talked about with Mississippi freedom schools. No one's thinking about, oh, if there's thousands, over 100,000 students staying out of school for a day, even, what are they doing on that day? And one of those answers was going to their local churches and going to freedom schools, singing freedom songs, getting a freedom diploma, talking about freedom, all of that. Couple more documents. Here we have 1965. This is Al Raby. He's one of the key figures of the Chicago movement. Ends up partnering with Martin Luther King when he shows up in town, but for now is leading this schools movement, and gave a talk at Soldier Field. This is an image from the talk at Soldier Field, and this is the speech from a different talk. But I think this speech in particular makes a really strong connection between the importance of the Chicago movement as a sort of lead into a national movement for the, I think that they describe it as a northern ghetto, but really the issues of the northern urban Black person during this time period. Finally, here we have an organization called the Women Mobilized for Change, which was a huge find for me because I am really interested in women in the movement. And this is a later issue too of them supporting Black students. So I think here you see that shift from parents and teachers and adults pushing for better education. And by the late 1960s, you see students who perhaps they were part of that boycott 5 years earlier, doing their own boycott, starting to lead their own movement. So I found that to be really interesting. Finally, let me wrap up with what's next for me, finishing the summer research. I do want to eventually conduct oral histories. I did not get to it this summer, but it is something that's on my radar, perhaps not for my dissertation, but certainly if this thing ever turns into a book. I will be taking a trip out to Stanford in the fall to see the Benjamin Willis papers. I don't know why they ended up at Stanford, but there they are. I have 1,200 plus documents to read, and then I have to write this dissertation. So thank you for coming. I would love to hear any questions, feedback, all of the above. And if you have lots of feedback for me, feel free to email me as well, because I would absolutely love to hear any and all feedback you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing your research with us. Such a rich content that you have there. Questions for Michelle? Let's see if there's anything. Oh, yes, I think in the Q&A, this may be a silly question from Sarah Pete. She says, but how do you deal with the photos of the documents once you have left the archives and are ready to dig into the content further? Do you print them out or you just read them enlarged on your computer screen? What do you do?
Yeah, so I take my pictures with an app on my phone called Genius Scan, which automatically turns it into a PDF. So that's the first thing for me is like, make it a PDF, because then I can use it on Adobe to OCR, making it searchable, things like that. Easy, better. I will label all of those documents as well with the archive that they come from. So I have tiny little footers on all of those documents with the archive and the folder, so that doesn't get lost. And they're all split up into individual documents. That is a lot of work, right? But it makes my life easier down the road, so it's worth it. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is I just go through those PDFs. Usually I will make one big folder of every document. So I do split them up from wherever they came from, and I make one big folder, and then I put it in order of year. So I put it in that timeline. I usually, by my labeling, the way that I label documents, I have it in that timeline already, so I can just organize it that way. And I sort of just go through and read it in order of when they were created. It's not always the best way, and I certainly move around and do it different ways as well, but that's the way I do it. Is the biggest step, though, I'd say, is turning into PDFs, making sure everything is labeled, and making sure that the naming convention is sort of the same for everything.
Great. Okay. What a process. So we have another question from Dino Robinson, who is the director over the Shorefront Legacy Center, which is a BMRC institution and focuses on the North Shore and African-American history there. So he's thanking you for your your research and sharing it. And to help you find more women in the movement, one that he is aware of is Alice Tregay, and there's a link in the Q&A there. So he says, our organization, Shorefront, partnered with her in creating a documentary film on her civil rights work in the Chicago area, and it's titled Alice's Ordinary People. That seeks to, and so it seems to be aligned with what you're looking for in terms of making sure you find more women in the movement.
Yeah, thank you so much for that recommendation.
Yeah, and Dino is also a BMRC board member, so very active with us. Other questions? Wow, people do want to keep in touch with you, so please, when you do get a chance before we wrap up, put your email in the chat, I guess, or we'll share it. Have you started the process of identifying participants here in the Chicago area for your oral interviews? This question from Wendy Hill. If so, if we hear of others in our travels, how can we get in contact with you? So again, wanting to follow up and give you feedback, and also to this person, Wendy Hill, she wants to share some info.
Yeah, thank you. So my email, So my email is just michelle.johnson@yale.edu. So if you're looking for me, that's it. And I think I just dropped that in the Q&A as well. I partially have started making that list. I also will do it as I go through these documents and really process. I know that also with the documentary with 63 Boycott, they have a pretty extensive sort of building list of participants there. So I am sort of drawing from some of that as well. Like I said, I don't know if I'm actually going to get to oral histories for this dissertation project right now, just because if you know, a good dissertation is a done dissertation. So I am trying to get it done, but certainly if it turns into a book project, that's something I for sure want to do. And with the time constraints, right? Like we know that these people unfortunately are older. So I do want to make moves as soon as I can. So it is something I'm interested in. It's just something that isn't necessarily on my radar right now.
Thank you, Michelle. There may be other questions which you can answer typing into the Q&A for us.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
I'm going to turn it back over to Marcia, I think.
Yes, thank you, Allison. We are so thankful for our interns, Cameron, Daian, and Sydnie, and also to the host institutions and to the staff of the host institutions who are mentoring those students. So Northern Illinois University, Cook County Historic Archives and Records Office, and DePaul University. And we are very grateful for Michelle Johnson's time. We don't want to keep too much of your time because you have 1,200 documents that you need to read. So we're definitely going to support you in doing that. What you see on the screen here is just some information about how you can connect with the BMRC and continue to engage with us. Our email address is there if you have thoughts or ideas, questions about the BMRC, about collections, really about anything that you think we could be helpful, please let us know. Our website is also listed there where you can find more information about everything that we've discussed today. Our YouTube information, as well as our social media handles where you can follow us at Chicago BMRC. So I'll turn it over to our board chair, Stephen Adams, who kicked us off, and I will let him send us out.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Thank you to all of our presenters. I'm really energized by the kind of interaction between Michelle and others, including Dino. I personally do research about curiosity, and I love the fact that we have a really curious audience, an audience willing to share resources and extend help to researchers. That's really what we're all about in the, here at the BMRC, and we're interested in connecting those who are interested in documenting, sharing, understanding, and preserving African American history. Thank you for your time today, and please continue these interactions at your home institutions, out in the community, and I guess that's all. Thanks to all of you. Take care and have a great day.